Welcome to the Sports Pharmacy Network show, where we dispense clinical and evidence-based information to optimize health and human performance. My name is Brandon Welch. I'm a clinical sports pharmacist and host of the show. My guest today is Julius Thomas. Julius is a cognitive scientist that specializes in mental performance and mental health. He is founder and CEO of his consulting and coaching company, Optimal Performance, that helps individuals and teams maximize their performance and well-being. Additionally, Julius is the vice president of the Society for Sports Neuroscience, serves on the NFL Players Association Behavioral Health Committee, and is an advisory board member for the Football Player Health Study at University of Harvard. Julius was an NCAA Division I basketball athlete with 2 NCAA tournament appearances and played 7 years in the NFL and 2 Pro Bowl selections. Currently, Julius is pursuing his doctorate of psychology degree in clinical health psychology at Nova Southeastern. His passion is to encourage, educate, and empower those he gets the privilege to work with. I must say, today's discussion is a very special one. I've long benefited from Julius's content to enhance my own mental well-being and performance. I assure you from today's episode, you will also benefit from his mental performance teachings. He describes and explores practices in real time on successful ways to improve your mental performance. You will hear rich discussions on the importance of prioritizing your mental well-being and how the principles he instills have helped a wide range of athletes, sports teams, and corporate executives with taking their work and talent to the next level. And now for my discussion with Julius Thomas. Welcome. What's up, JT?
My God, man. I appreciate the introduction. Obviously, appreciate another opportunity for us to get talking about health like we normally do. Big fan of the podcast and love listening to, some of the other people that come on and talk about what they know. And I'm happy to be here to talk about, how we take this mind from a performance and a health perspective to its capacity. I'm very focused and driven to figure out, what are the limits and what are the performance gains that we can have in this kind of new developing field.
Hey, man, and you said it. We've been talking about this episode for a while. And, I'm really excited to get this going is because we know that, like, when it comes to mental health, I mean, you've been an expert in this space. We know that I almost consider it like a silent epidemic, right? I mean, the statistics don't lie. Just to kind of start the discussion off, with me being a scientist and having that clinical background, I always do my research, man, when it comes to stats and facts. And it's crazy, man, when I was reading up on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it showed each year over 200 million workdays are lost due to mental health conditions. Can you believe that?
Man, I was actually trying to find a way to visualize the enormity of the mental health crisis. And I was thinking about COVID in particular and how many people unfortunately lost their life due to the COVID virus. And what was really interesting is over 1 million people in the U.S. lost their life to COVID. I was thinking to myself, like, man, that's a lot of people. And we have this, really a global response to try to protect as many people we can because the loss of life was that severe. But then I started looking at what the numbers are for mental health conditions. And those numbers make 1 million look very little. Like the sheer numbers are staggering. You talk about 200, I think you said, million work days of loss.
Wow, staggering.
But we're talking about 130 plus million people that are going to be diagnosed with anxiety at some point in their life. Upwards of 60 million people that are going to have a depression diagnosis at some point in their life. And depression is one of the mental health conditions that's really responsible for a lot of that loss of work and productivity that we experience here in our country. So when we talk about mental health, I mean, we're talking about numbers that continue to grow. I don't quote me on this, but I was reading an article earlier. I should have went back into it, but I believe it said 1/3 of adolescents between ages 12 and 17 have received treatment, medication, or counseling in the last year for mental health challenges. And
I believe it.
it is a big thing. And, I think we're right in the cusp of a time when that awareness that people have about mental health is growing. And now we're going to have to figure out how we can prevent it.
Hey, the best way that we can help treat people with this condition is for people like us and then other people with large platforms to keep being huge advocates for help and providing valuable resources when it comes to people who may be suffering from mental health. And I always say, just like how every single year we go and get our annual physicals, we get our blood work, we check to make sure everything's okay, right? Why not do an annual mental health checkup? I mean,
it's something I think a lot about, right?
yeah.
Because when we start to look at health in general, right, and being in the field of psychology, you really just study human behavior. And we have created a culture around health that's reactive. And I was in Greece possibly, I think, 3 years ago now. And I'll never forget starting to see, Hippocrates in his life. And, the father of medicine. I mean, we still have to take a Hippocratic oath as, clinicians. And I started thinking that, 400 years BC, people were coming up to Hippocrates and they were saying, it's this, or, oh, I'm having this challenge. And so the beginning of medicine was to be able to treat people that were having symptoms that were too severe or too uncomfortable for them to be able to want to deal with any longer. And we still have that same system today where people are coming in to see you or they're coming to see me or the other peers that we have. And they're like, hey, this is too much. It's too hard for me to experience. And really it hit me. And I thought, that's 2,500 years of doing that. And in the year 2024, we have to flip people's minds around. We have to get people to understand that, wait, I have to look at my health the way I look at my performance.
Absolutely.
I have to address it. I have to maintain it. I have to create resiliency in it. And that's the only way that we are going to start to decrease this really big health epidemic we have here in our country, and to be able to educate and encourage people and empower them with the tools to make sure that we stay ahead of health and not get behind the 8 ball, because we know what happens at that point.
And hey, man, to piggyback off what you just said, you said something very key, is that we're a little bit too reactive and not enough proactive. And the hard truth is that if you're saying that this started 2,500 years ago, 2,500 BC, then if you think about it, resources have become larger and larger and larger over the years. I mean, I feel like we have an abundance of resources that we can go to when it comes to any type of mental health issues that we may be dealing with. But it's now figuring out, how do we disseminate this information appropriately to people who may need the actual help. And so I wanted to really kick things off with the impact that you're making across multiple organizations, speaking on this very important topic of mental well-being for peak performance. So if you don't mind telling the audience a little bit about the work you're doing in the field around mental health and why this has been such a huge focus for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The name of my company is Optimal Performance, and I really have one goal: to leverage science to help people maximize their performance and their well-being. Like, that could be a period, end, stop. That's what I love doing, and that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I really got this idea to create this company called Optimal Performance being in graduate school. And as a future health psychologist, I was constantly studying comorbid health challenges, right? Physical and mental. And then I was looking at these numbers and going, these numbers are outrageous. Why is this happening? And then an epiphany hit me. And you can tell me how you take this, but I always say that clinicians would be the worst goalies ever, because as clinicians, you could see the person dribbling towards the goal, knowing that eventually they're going to come take a shot at goal, but you wouldn't move. You would never leave the line. And then they would kick the ball, and then you still wouldn't move. You would watch the ball go into the net, and wherever it went into the net, you would describe specifically what this new diagnosis is, and then you'd pick the ball up and say, okay, and now I'm here to help. And I thought,
too late.
Way too late. We, as clinicians, are always treating people that have things, but we're not getting ahead of things. We're not anticipating and preventing. We're not being a good defense. And that's something that I thought a lot about. And I thought, I can spend the rest of my life waiting by my phone, waiting for somebody to call me and say, hey, JT, what's happening? I don't feel like being here anymore. Or I'm so sad and life has gotten so hard that, man, I haven't left my house in 10 days. Or I'm so anxious, I can't do the things that matter to me, and on with different clinical disorders. And I thought, no, I'm not waiting. And I said, the problem is we have access to information that only 1% of the world can understand and 1% of the world has access to. But the other 99% of people, they need it. They need someone to come out and to teach them, not in our language, not in our vernacular, but in theirs. And so optimal performance for me was an opportunity to serve people in the high performing community. And the high performing community is very broad. I'm talking about business professionals. I'm talking about the person that says, I'm going down there to work at Ernst & Young and I'm just an administrative person. Cool. Guess what? You're out there and your performance is what it provides for your family. And so my version of performance is really broad, but I want people that are motivated, people that want to have balance and fulfillments in their life. They want to do what they can to prevent illness and disease, to have the information they need to do so.
And we all deserve that, right? And so when it comes to mental health, it's not innate, it's cultivated. And so like you said, like sometimes as a clinician, we have the opportunity to be the last line of defense, meaning we can stop the puck and address the issue before it actually becomes too late, right? We went to school for 8+ years for a reason, and people are spending their time to come see us for a reason. So that way they can get the high quality information that they need. And it's important for us to stop and take the time to address these issues up front, rather than in your case, someone having to reach out to someone like yourself or someone like me, where they say, to your exact example, I don't want to be here anymore. And unfortunately, sometimes when people get to that last step, even though that they address that issue, sometimes it really is too late.
It is. I mean, to be personal here and give people the opportunity to understand how hard this is for me to live with and how bad I want to change it. My uncle Keith, I grew up with my Uncle Keith. My Uncle Keith was the guy that used to come to my house all the time. Him and my dad are so close. Man, I had so many memories of my Uncle Keith. And unfortunately, he passed away this February at the age of 62. And I couldn't believe it when I got the call and they said, hey, just want to let you know Uncle Keith passed away. The first thing that came to my mind was, from what? What did he pass away from? And they said, well, we don't know yet. We just know that he was dropped off at the hospital. He was there for about 3 hours, and then they called and they pronounced him dead. And as a family member, you're hurt, you're sad. But as a clinical trained person, you're like, what WTF happened? How could that happen? Right. And so I later came to find out that he died of a blood infection. A blood infection. We can treat blood infections, and we can treat them highly successfully if we get them early enough. Sure. There's really no reason to die from a blood infection in a Western country unless you got there at the last possible moment. And that for me is just an example, one that hits close to home, one that I don't want other people to experience. When we wait to the last possible moment, when we can no longer take the symptoms we have for any condition, we've really tied the hands of the medical community, of the doctors, of the professionals that are there to help. And I have to try to find a way to get people to understand how to be proactive and how to be early when it comes to their health?
It's like if I can use the example of pre-diabetes, pre-hypertension, pre-cholesterol, right? If you catch it early enough, we have an opportunity to reverse it rather than once it becomes full-blown type 2 diabetes, full-blown hypercholesterol, right? It becomes harder to manage and treat. And one thing I want to bring up is, and that I've learned this, is that when it comes to mental health, it does not discriminate.
Nope.
Poor, rich, wealthy, middle class. I mean, some of the poor people are the happiest people in the world, and some of the wealthiest people are the most miserable people in the world. And so when you talk about mental health and people trying to use that as a platform and proving that to use as a platform to improve or enhance their performance, you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter if it's the grocery bagger at Publix. It doesn't matter if it's the CEO of a large Fortune 500 company. Mental health, I can't stress it enough, it does not discriminate. And it's a silent killer. And so it's always very important to make sure, again, that we keep stressing, we try to catch it before it's too late.
Yep.
Now kind of moving on into our next question here. So when we talk about being proactive with our health, our mental health in particular, what would you say are kind of like your main pillars or your isms when it comes to mental well-being?
And this is a phenomenal question. And this is something I thought about a lot. I'm the kind of person that asks myself questions. If somebody asked me, what are the things that I should be most focused on if I wanted to prevent developing a mental health disorder? What are those things that are my early warning signs? What if it's for my kids? I want to have an early warning sign because I don't want to get to the point where now I'm taking my kid down to a therapist's office and we're doing some intensive work. So one of the first signs that your mental health is being stressed beyond your capacity to handle it individually. And let's make this clear, is we've had this concept that we need to be able to handle everything that happens between our ears on our own. And that's just a cultural concept that's not true. We should get support when it's beyond our capacity. So the first thing that I tell people to really start to pay attention to is your sleep. You should be able to fall asleep when you lay down in the bed within 30 minutes. That is sleep hygiene 101. If you are unable to sleep, we got something going on here. We talking about, chronic stress. We're talking about anxiety. We're talking about, maybe abuse of substances. Like there's something happening to your mental health if you're not able to go to sleep in that 30 minutes. Insomnia happens to be part of the diagnostic criteria of so many psychological disorders. So if you start to notice like, wait, and I have a lot of trouble falling asleep, or I have a lot of trouble staying asleep, bing, that's your first sign. Man, maybe there's something going on with my mental health. The next thing I think of when I talk to people about early warning signs for their mental health is your mood. Most people don't keep a mood journal, but I have had times in my life where burnout specifically started to really affect my mood. And I caught it one day going, why am I more irritated? Why am I angrier? Why do I feel my emotions swinging more in a day than they usually do? Oh, wait, my mental health is being stressed. And so I try to ask the people that I work with, and one of the behind the scenes secrets that I use in optimal performance is I tell people, keep a mood journal. And I want you to write down out of a 1 to 10 what your mood was that day, 10 being the happiest, 1 being the lowest. And then to take it a next step further, I ask them, write down your positive mood minus your negative mood. For example, I was working with a client and she was a successful business owner, the best her year had ever had in business. And she was like, I'm unhappy. So I asked her, I said, what's your daily positive mood if you had to rate it between a 1 to 10? She said a 2. Now that's hard to hear. It's extremely hard to hear that somebody is going through that many mood challenges. But then I said, okay, but what's your negative mood? She said an 8. I said, so we're at a negative 6 as a value when we take your positive minus your negative mood. That is unsustainable. Anytime you're positive minus your negative mood is less than zero, you're at risk.
Oh.
Now, if you were saying I have my positive moods at a 4 and a negative moods at a 3, okay, you would be able to do that chronically. But once you flip and you have a negative number, hey, there's something we need to do. Another big warning sign when it comes to your mental health is, are you starting to isolate yourself? Now, I know that there's people that are introverts, a little bit like myself. I need to spend time to be able to read. Sometimes I just want to be off on my own, watching my YouTube videos, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But when you start to truly isolate yourself a lot, stop hanging out with your family and friends the way you used to, not the way other people do, the way you used to. That is another a reaction. And you and I both know that that's part of the symptoms of sickness and high inflammation, right? And so these are the three things that I say you should really be aware of for yourself and those you love. First, your sleep. Next is mood. And then the next is, are the people you know and love and care about isolating themselves? If you see these signs, okay, now it's time to go find a mental health professional and really do a little bit of a deep dive.
No, I think that those are great golden nuggets there. And I've always felt this, and I don't know if you feel this the same way. I feel like sometimes we live in a society where we're overworked and underrested. And it almost tackles onto your point of a lack of sleep, insomnia, and a lack of sleep having that compound effect of you being in a bad mood.
Yep.
And it becomes a cycle, right? And the sad thing about it is sometimes we're not addressing the root cause. If we get sufficient sleep, we'll have a better mood. If we have a better mood, we'll have healthier relationships. And it becomes this healthy cascade of events that can essentially contribute to you having a healthy mental well-being.
100%, man. I talk about this a lot when I do my work with corporate clients, right? When we have a couple hundred people in a meeting room and I'm teaching them and I'm talking about how they can maintain their mental health and well-being. CNBC did a poll, maybe it's early 2024, late 2023, sometime within the last year. And that poll showed that 48% of people say that they feel burnt out. Full stop, man. 1 in 2 Americans say, I'm burnt out and I can feel the irritability. I feel myself getting frustrated just going and driving to work. I don't have the energy that I need. I know I haven't been sleeping well. I know I'm not taking care of myself, right? When you have 1 out of 2 working people in a country that feel burnt out, that tells you the kind of challenge that we are going through psychologically. And the craziest part about burnout is the symptoms of burnout are very similar to the symptoms of depression. Now, we have a bunch of people that have conditions that are so hard or lack the information that they need to a degree where they feel like they can't control their mood. They feel like they have a lack of motivation and drive. They're having trouble sleeping, right? Like, what? This is the stuff that I love working on and I love teaching people about, because we can't have 1 in 2 people feeling burnt out. We just can't.
The data is unimpeachable.
Yep.
Like 1 in 2, 48% of Americans feeling burnt out from their work. It almost makes me think too that we need to establish some level of healthy boundaries, understanding when to shut it down, shut it off. And I think, and I don't know if you'd agree with this too, a leading cause of people's mental health is the inundation of social media. Social media has its pros and cons. And one of the things I do like about social media, especially with Facebook, is they've started creating these Facebook support groups, right? Which can be very therapeutic for people who may be suffering from some type of mental health condition, is because what better person to talk to than people that are dealing with something similar to yourself? The downside is us constantly scrolling and looking at people's lives, which can sometimes be an illusion in us trying to compare and contrast our own lives. And it's like, hey, why can't I take that nice vacation to Greece or Rome or to Paris to go to the Olympics? Instead, I'm stuck inside of my house and I'm miserable and I'm dealing with something very personable, right? And you kind of compare your situation, your stressful
Yep.
situation, to what you see on social media. And so when I say establishing those boundaries and understand how to shut it off, almost like how we talked about prior to us jumping on this podcast, is Jordan Childs, right? How she got stripped away from her gold medal due to a scoring error. And then she comes out right after that and she's like, hey, look, guys, I'm sorry, but I'm removing myself from social media to help support my own mental health and well-being. I thought that was a rich and powerful statement. And that comes from what? Establishing boundaries.
Yeah, well, when we really look at what Jordan Childs did, which is an example of the kind of person she is, was she did the behavior that was going to help her become healthier. And
Yes. Powerful.
sometimes that's setting a boundary, and sometimes that's starting a routine, right?
Yes.
It's on both spectrums. And so kudos to her for recognizing that
Absolutely.
what was happening every time she engaged in the behavior of looking at her social media was making it more mentally and psychologically challenging and taxing for her. And she went, wow, in order to protect my mental well-being, I need to turn this off for a second. And then I want other people that are listening to think about, in order to protect your mental well-being, what do you have to turn on? And the last thing I'll say about, um, settings in which it creates psychological challenge and strain that can lead to disorders is over 80% of people say that their workplace is responsible for their mental health challenges. This is something I'm extremely motivated about, and this is why I love working with leaders. And this is why my company and we collaborate with leadership of high performing teams, because it's starting there. We're spending the majority of our lives in our workplace nowadays. And if we don't have the right leadership, if we don't have the right culture, we can be creating mental health challenges for people that leads to mental health disorders. That 200 million days of missed work, a good millions of those portions comes from the type of workplaces that people have to go work in every day, and gives us a great opportunity to create better workplaces, which is also going to be important for helping us to protect our mental well-being. That's probably a little bit more applicable to the average person, with the exception of teenagers. We know what social media is doing to the mental health of teenagers, and the data is out, the research is out, and we really have to figure out how we're going to engage and interact with new technologies in the future to be able to protect our mental well-being.
No, you bring up an excellent point there. And speaking of corporations, I mean, I would almost think it's a given for them to push healthy mental well-being, only because when people are missing days like that due to, them feeling depressed or having anxiety, them not being happy at work, it leads to a loss of productivity. A loss of productivity, if we're thinking about financial implications, impacts your return on investment, right?
Mhm.
And then also, when people aren't happy where they're at over time, what happens? They leave.
They leave.
They go somewhere else. And now we're talking about your turnover rate being higher,
Yep.
right? And so you almost trying to address or correct the issue, corporations would almost want to push for that more. And look, it starts from, like you mentioned, it starts from the leadership. It starts from the top down. And so I hope that organizations continue, and some of the work that you're doing is amazing and outstanding, talking to a lot of organizations and speaking to people in those C-suite positions to, one, address their mental health issues first, so that way that can be passed down or funneled down to the rest of the people that are in their organization.
And it's one of the more disheartening things for me that is unfortunate, excuse me, is that it's not a given yet. Is that we have so many private and public professional settings where the leaders are not focused on creating a culture of well-being.
Mm.
Because what we can do in our country, and we see this all the time in the spaces that we work in, and particularly with athletes, is people get so focused on performance that they forget to maintain well-being. And this concept, for me, is called the cost of performance.
Mm.
And this is the foundational piece of what I like to teach. Think about a person like Robin Williams that had amazing performance, one of the most well-known, well-respected, funniest guys of my early life. But he didn't want to be here anymore.
Mm.
Took his own life. Because you can be performing at your peak, but if your well-being's not there, you're going to have problems. And that's the cost of performance. Look at a guy like Michael Jackson, one of the most famous, greatest entertainers of all times. Little kids will be doing Michael Jackson dances that were born after he was no longer here.
Shoot, I remember myself even trying that.
Yeah.
Doing the MJ dance.
Michael Jackson couldn't sleep. Whatever was happening here was so distressful that he had to have an anesthesiologist come put him to sleep at night, and eventually that became the cause of him losing his life. And then we can go on and on about examples and examples of people that have suffered from the cost of performance. But we've created a cost of performance in our country because when we get so dialed in, right, we think about athletes. People don't care about who they are as human beings. They just care about their production so that they can win their bet that they've placed, or they can win their fantasy league, or they can go talk some mess at work and gloat to their coworker about whose team was better. But just like we have to remind coaches to think about their players' well-being, and there's some coaches that are less motivated by that than others, it's the same in corporations and it's the same in C-suites everywhere. People, it's not that they don't recognize that well-being is important, but they can get so focused on performance that they don't manage to maximize them both at the same time. And that's what optimal performance is about. It's how do we avoid the cost of performance? How do we make sure that the foundation of our performance is our well-being? Because that's the only way we can sustain it over time.
And you bring up a good point here, is because I always say this too, is the only thing that matters is how you feel about yourself when you're by yourself, right? Is because I like to say this too, is there's a difference between being happy and fulfilled. And I don't know if you will agree with this, and I'll break it down. Happiness is a moment. So that wide receiver that gets that touchdown and he does his fancy dance, or Jalen Waddle that gets that touchdown, who does the Waddle dance. That's a moment. That's a moment, right? But fulfillment is long-lasting moments that's sustainable and that's long-term. It's you being fulfilled and satisfied with the things you do, the people you're connected with on a daily basis. It's not a short-term fix. It's not a quick hit of dopamine release. No, it's a very long-term and sustainable thing. And it makes me wonder too when you mention Robin Williams, right? And Michael Jackson. They did everything that they wanted to do. I mean, these are two revolutionary people, right? Where their talents will almost never be matched. And here it is, they were still suffering with something deep down inside. And I think that there's a powerful message to be said there, that it's important regardless. And again, how we talked about, hey, when it comes to mental health, it does not discriminate, right? And it sends a powerful message that it's important to just be very proactive again when it comes to your mental health and well-being.
Man, I couldn't agree more. And to go back to what you started mentioning, and I do not disagree with you at all, there is a difference between happiness and fulfillment. Happiness is an emotion.
Yeah,
Sad it is for me to say. So happiness, sadness, anger, fear, all that stuff is just constantly changing like the weather. And we hope we have more happy moments than those other ones. Don't get me wrong. But that is just a feeling. But fulfillment is a state. And what people are trying to get towards is fulfillment. And this is what I'm so glad you said it, because this is what I encourage people to find. This is what my goal is for people that work with optimal performance, is how do we get you to fulfillment? Because what I've learned from my own personal experience in being around some of the most successful people in the world for over a decade now is there's no amount of money, there's no amount of status, there's no amount of cool parties, nice cars, great jewelry and outfits that inoculates you from suffering. There isn't. And we just went through some examples, and I got example after example after example that shows you that stuff will not inoculate you from suffering. But when you put a focus and intentional energy around making sure that you're well, that's how you create fulfillment. And that's why I continue to encourage people. Do not forget about your well-being. You will never be fulfilled if you don't have great well-being. But you can be fulfilled without having a $10 million house backed up on the water. There's somebody, when you're going up to Intercoastal, we both live in South Florida, and you're looking at $5 million house after $5 million house. Just go by, and when you feel yourself getting a little judging yourself that you don't have one of those, just remind yourself, probably every other house is a person that's really suffering. And there's nothing that house can do to take that away. The only thing you can do is to focus on your well-being, your physical, your mental, and your emotional health.
Dude, that's a great way to put it. And now, since we're coming off the Olympics, right? When did the Olympics end? Yesterday.
Yep, yesterday.
I'd almost be remiss, not to mention a world-class athlete in the name of Simone Biles, who has been very vocal about her mental health struggles. And I want to echo something she recently mentioned to a reporter. So 3 years ago, she thought she would never step foot on the gymnastics floor again due to a quote unquote mental injury she was dealing with. And we saw during the Olympics this glamoring snapshot, which I thought was very special and strategic, that was taken as she was meditating during the competition. What message do you think that sends to the American people that were witnessing that special moment of Simone Biles pretty much meditating?
Well, I think the first message that she sent that I thought was such an important message that I actually did a post about it on my socials because I wanted everybody to know that there is no mental challenge that you can't come back from. People think that if I have a mental challenge, that is going to prohibit me from going on to be able to do the things that I want, to have great success. Absolutely not. It's bogus. You can have a mental challenge, and if you handle it and you respect that challenge and get the right help, you can respond like a champion. And that's the first thing that she demonstrated, is that now if you have some mental challenge, you know that you could do what Simone Biles did. Go be honest, go seek some support for it, work on strategies that can help you prevent it happening again, right? Like, look, that's just a microcosm of everything we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
Strategy is one of the biggest and best evidence-based strategies, which is meditation. Mindfulness is such a powerful, it's really a philosophy, but it's such a powerful philosophy for helping people with their mental health that almost every psychological orientation has added a mindfulness component to it, right? Like, we're talking about mindfulness was really introduced in the clinical space in the U.S. Through John Kabat-Zinn. I don't know, was that late 90s, early 80s and 90s, somewhere in that time. None of the orientations had a mindfulness component. Now, majority of the psychological orientations have a mindfulness component. They got CBT mindfulness, they've got DBT, they've got ACT, right? On and on. Mindfulness is probably one of the greatest philosophies invented to help a person to be able to support and prevent mental health challenges.
And the apps are available too. They got Headspace. I use the Calm app, which I think great.
On this call, I was like, you know what? I've been ripping and running around all day today. I had to run by Nova, and then I ran to Men's Warehouse to get fitted for my tux for my boy's wedding. And then I'm taking calls and emails, and I said, you know what I need to do? I need to meditate. And so I went on YouTube, and I was like, calm meditation. Calm meditation popped up. I did it 10 minutes. It zoned me back in. And you know what it did? It just to, we haven't got too sciencey on here, but it stimulates
Yeah.
the vagal nerve just enough to give me 10 minutes of parasympathetic activity. And that's why I always try to encourage people to do it. And that vagal nerve is such an important nerve, and being able to help us switch into our rest and digest and our restorative functions, and recognizing when you've been chronically working or you're a little sped up, and taking the time to meditate, it's everything.
It's like they say, our goal as individuals is to try to keep our body in homeostasis, right? There's obviously going to be some sympathetic activity going on, which I like to say stress isn't necessarily bad. Stress is actually a catalyst for growth,
Yep.
right? My only point is that how do we make stress adaptive instead of how we talked about earlier, reactive, right? How do we adapt into stress, make it acute, keep it at bay instead of turning it into being chronic? And, it's like how you just mentioned, like, hey, 10 minutes before you got on this call, you felt like you were running around doing it a lot and you just needed to stop, put your mind on idle and do some meditation. It's no different from when I talk to a lot of my clients, right, who have a hard time trying to fit in exercises because they're always overworking. I'm always like, hey, for the most part, everybody gets a 15-minute break at some point in their work schedule, right? And so I'll talk to them about what I like to call exercise snacks, implementing them, whether that's going outside for a small walk, walking up the stairs. Same thing with mental health, right? And so if you have 5-10 minutes to spur where you can go in your car, go for a small walk, and turn on some type of meditation music to help kind of activate that parasympathetic nervous system, it can really pay off healthy dividends long term.
No, man. Exactly what you said. And I love that you called them exercise snacks, right? Because you want to help people understand that in just a short amount of time, you can do something that's really valuable for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I always phrased it is, what are those health behaviors that move the needle for us? And have we identified what those are? Some of the simple things. I got a presentation that I'm doing on Wednesday with a group of 60 GMs and state managers. And I've got a whole slide. It's called Easy to Forget. Because it's easy to forget to do some of those health behaviors that we talk about. But what about not sitting for more than 2 hours straight? What about getting up out of that chair to help your cardiovascular system? Bam, easy one to forget. And it's easy to do. We don't often think about how important it is to take breaks in general. Not understanding that the human body is so resilient and so dynamic, and we can force it through stressors and conditions that make us unique in the animal kingdom to be able to do that. But it doesn't mean we should do that all the time. And it's funny because I laugh and I think, man, in sports, we solved this problem 15 years ago. If you look at a exercise strength coach, they've built recovery into the training. You knew when you started the season, okay, this is my heavy lift day. This is my light lift day. That light lift day is there to help your body recover because you can't go. The leagues have built in recovery days where you can't just practice 7 days a week for 4 weeks like training camp was back in the day. No. Now you can only practice 6. And then certain days you can only do certain. So when you start to create recovery and health routines, you actually boost your performance. And helping the general population understand that, and then having a coach that they can work with, it helps them learn and identify how to go through periods of stress, allostasis, and then to come out into restorative homeostasis and then build a plan around them and their life is really the value of having health coaching. And it's a reason why I'm a big proponent of it. And I'll continue to do it because that truly gives people an individual prescription for fulfillment.
It's like you said, too, with building a routine. I almost feel like you have to build a system around this where we may have addressed this earlier, where this becomes a priority and not an option.
Yep. Yep.
And I think if we're talking about how do we build these rituals, how do we build these routines, we have to make it a priority. I mean, there's notifications that can be put on your phone. I mean, I know some people, for example, if they're trying to make sure they're getting enough water, right, in their daily day, they try to set these notifications. I mean, there's apps galore out there to kind of notify ourselves, which I think is actually a plus. Having these notifications to remind us, okay, it's time for us to stop, to implement, this short mental health exercise. And go ahead.
No, but what I would say is we have to talk about the value of coaching. Without coaches, it's just a million things around you. And you can talk, and I'm sure you have, and I have. I've talked to clients, and they're like, I want to do something for my well-being. I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing? They're like, well, I'm lifting weights, I'm riding a bike, I'm swimming for 6 miles, I'm doing triathlons, and I'm like, all that's great, but you could be over-exercising.
Mm.
What about the other parts of your health and well-being? Are you doing restorative things where your heart rate is lower? I see a lot of people that say, no, I should be feeling good. I'm doing all this healthy stuff. And I'm like, but that's all high intense stuff. Your body's not meant to be high intense. But they're like, no, but I saw the person on YouTube, or I saw the person on Instagram. These are all good, healthy things. And I'm like, yes, but. And so one of the things that I'm a big believer in is coaching, because everything that I've learned at the highest level, I had someone there to help me identify, prioritize, and create the best solutions for myself. And so the value of working with a coach when it comes to your health is allowing someone to understand your life and the components within it, and then to start to help you fit in the various important areas of health that you need to check off on a daily basis. And I talk about, how do we help people understand how to have an optimal performance day? How do you get the right sleep, commit the right time to your work, focus on your self-care, your growth, your relationships? Like, those are all parts of your well-being. And so working with a person that has an expertise in well-being can really be beneficial for people, because you and I both know, we talk about products all the time. There's
right.
So many to go through. I don't know which one's good. How do I not? Hell, I call you or I shoot you a text. Man, like, is this good? Like, this is really my space, right? And so that value of having an expert in your life. And this is what, for me, why I've been so committed to growing and building optimal performance, so I can give people that, so that they can say, you know what, I'm going to take this time once every 2 weeks, meet with JT, and we're going to make sure that I'm good and I'm in the right place. Just like when I was an athlete and I met with the athletic trainer, or I met with the strength coach, to make sure I'm good.
And piggybacking off of that, JT, with you being a former athlete, you once being in those shoes and understanding what it's like to play football at a high level, and like how you mentioned, you have all these different coaches that are trying to gear you to do certain specific things. Looking back, what would you say were some of the challenges you may have suffered from mentally? And what advice would you recommend for the next generation of upcoming athletes who may be fighting against the same grain?
My biggest mistake was lacking humility. I can see how that has tripped me up in a lot of ways throughout my life. And fortunately for me, I'm starting to gain the importance of having humility. And one of the ways that lacking humility showed up for me was pride. Man, I had so much pride. And the biggest mistake I had from a mental health perspective is that I believed that it was my responsibility to handle my mental and emotional challenges alone. I thought, this is something that I need to be doing. This is a sign of my strength and my capacity to be able to do this alone. And so I made the mistake of suffering in silence for too long. And this is something I encourage everyone: do not suffer in silence. It's unnecessary. It's unhelpful. It takes a lot of humility to recognize when your mental and emotional challenges are too much and they're creating too much suffering in your life, hey, I need to talk to somebody and I need to get some help with this. That was my biggest mistake. The other mistake I made was not understanding how I was coping with my challenges. When I look back, we we were modeled coping strategies from our families throughout generations. And those aren't always the most helpful. My family specifically, we cope with hard times and challenges by partying. When we're going through a lot, we get together and we have this big party, we drink, we eat. It was like a positive experience that helped people kind of handle those big challenges. But then it can become a problem if you're a professional athlete, because you got more access to parties than once every 2 months at a family's birthday or a holiday, right? Like you can start to partying every night if you want. And
hey, especially if you're in South Beach.
Yeah, especially
Miami.
So I want everybody that's listening to this episode to think about how they cope. Are you using healthy or unhealthy coping mechanisms? Are you gambling, drinking, eating, taking substances to help you with your inner challenges? Or are you journaling, reading, exercising, seeking therapy and counseling? And so those, I think, are the two biggest challenges that I experience, and I think most people do. Suffering in silence and coping with your inner suffering in a way that's unhealthy that you cannot continue to do long term.
Now, do you think part of suffering in silence may be, I know you mentioned one of the key things for athletes to do, or anybody who may be suffering in silence, is one, to have a humility. But also, do you think that there is still like this negative stigma around speaking to a therapist or mental health coach when you need one? Or do you think athletes who have used their platform to advocate around mental health has allowed it to become a little bit more normalized to address these issues?
You know, I'm going to go away from a little bit probably of the narrative, and forgive me for this, but in my experience with the people I'm interacting with, I do think the stigma around seeking mental health support is changing.
Good.
I don't think it's as stigmatized as it was 5 years ago. Definitely not as stigmatized as it was 10 years ago. But therein lies the problem. Because what most people that I've talked to, they run into this experience of not finding the right therapist on the first try and then saying, oh, it wasn't for me. So we have now created a culture where people are like, you know what? I should make the call. I'm going to find the therapist. They sit down, they work with the therapist, and they go, that therapist, we didn't jive together. We didn't build a rapport. That therapist doesn't understand me and my circumstances. I'm done with therapy. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. There is nothing that ever said that every single therapist is uniquely best positioned to help you. What the research actually says is that it's going to take a couple times usually to find your right therapist.
I'm a big fan of second opinions.
Yeah, feel comfortable about going through 3 or 4 different people until you're, this is the therapist for me. Yep. Also, try to find a therapist that has a similar demographic, a similar upbringing. All of that really helps. And that's the quiet part that we notice and we talk about, and really in health in general, but especially in mental health, is having therapists that are like you, that grew up like you, that have the same experience as you, really helps to assist in helping a person heal and get better through mental health symptoms. So try to find therapists that remind you of you. And that's going to be really helpful in finding that right therapist. But sometimes it takes time. Don't give up. It's just like finding the right gym coach at the gym, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the first one had you doing too much explosive lifting. You're like, hey, this ain't for me. This ain't cool. So, give it some time. But I think that that's probably the biggest thing that I'm hearing is, I tried it. It didn't work. I'm done trying it. And it's like, nah. You'll find the right one.
It's like I say too, man, when it comes to selecting that right therapist. I mean, They shouldn't just be interviewing you. You need to be interviewing them too to make sure that they are the right fit for you.
Absolutely. Um, all licensed, trained professionals have demonstrated an understanding and an ability to help people with mental disorders, but not every single one of them is your person.
Mm.
And you got to date a little bit when it comes to finding that right mental health professional. But when you find it, you'll know. When you find him or her, you'll know. And you're
You'll
like, this
feel
is my person. And we rock. And
it.
myself, and I don't feel judged. And I'm learning things, and you're making me think about things that I take home and I consider. And then I'm improving and growing. And everyone can find that person. But I just want to encourage people to, number one, when you feel that, nah, this ain't it, respect it and just be like, yep, this ain't for me. And if you feel that, nah, this ain't it, don't give up. Find that right person that you can have that can become a strong sense of support for you being able to be your complete, vulnerable, open, authentic self for that little bit of time, however often you decide to do it every month.
Great practical advice, man. Before we wrap, what changes would you like to see in how society approaches mental well-being?
I think that I'm going to go to what I said earlier. I want us to go from a reactive system to a preventative one. And unfortunately, it's always going to be hard for the medical system to be preventative. Number one, because we already got our hands full, right? Like, let's be honest about it, man. The lobby is always full, and work is necessary and it needs to be done. But the way that people can become preventative about their mental health is to take the time to educate themselves. We talked about social media earlier, and I thought, I don't know how many hours people are spending on social media a week.
The average person checking their phone 38 to 40 times a day.
Yeah, so let's just say crazy. We're 15 to 20 hours on average of a person on social media. How many of those hours can you commit to licensed, educated individuals that are on those spaces to help educate you and give you information you need? One of the things that really sticks out to me is, especially when it comes to mental health, there are a ton of great mental health professionals that produce content and they can't get a view, but you'll have an influencer or a reality TV show person talking about mental health, and they're getting 6 million. We really have to educate ourselves as a general population, and we got to find the people that have took the time to get the training that can give us the tools that we need to be preventative, because I think any other way is probably going to be too cost prohibitive. Like, it's not cheap to meet with a mental performance coach. That's expensive, but
it is.
I'm going to give out content every month that little by little over time, a person can say, okay, damn, I'm just eating these nuggets. And then, okay, JT's starting to help educate me about how to do this. And that it'll be a slower process, but I think that that's the big change we need to make.
So JT, before we go, man, I'm going to make sure you're practicing what you're preaching. What are the things that you do every single day, man, to make sure your mental health is in check?
I love it. And it's good because I tell myself, man, I can't teach this if I don't do this.
Yeah.
So I stay on top of it. But I'm going to go with the big three. Really the big two, but I'll throw the third one in there because it's important as well. But number one, sleep. There's nothing more anabolic than sleeping. You pick the system in your body. If you wanted to restore and to heal, sleep is the time all of that happens. You want healthy hormonal balance, sleep, you name it, on and on, right? So sleep, I'm so committed to getting that 7 hours minimum.
Facts.
That's been one of the biggest changes I've made in my life since studying health. The second is trying to exercise daily. And I don't mean a hard, intense exercise, but something daily, at least that 30 to 60 minutes. One of the things that I've started to do a lot is to walk. I've had the knee surgeries. I've had the ankle injuries. I got the herniated disc in the spine. I can't go hit 6 miles on the treadmill or go run on concrete pavement for 6 miles every day. No, sometimes it's just walk at a good pace. And sometimes it's just 30 minutes, sometimes it's an hour. So, making sure I get the sleep and exercise is important. And then I think that, one of the other big things is that we all forget and we got to do a better job of in our country is what are you doing every day to recover?
Mm.
What is a low, and I started to say it like this because I think that people were not understanding what I meant by recovery. What is the low heart rate thing you do to recover? What is something where you're pretty much not doing anything besides sitting and just breathing to help your body recover? And some of the things that I've really started to do a lot are meditation. I love to do yin yoga, passive stretching, something that's just super slow stretch. Stretching is amazing, right? Stretching is one of the best things for me. And then the other one I do that's kind of a pastime I've started to do a lot now is to just sit in the backyard for 25 minutes after I put the kids to bed and just listen to some jazz. Just sit out there, listen to some jazz music. I don't want the words. I just want to sit in the lanai, throw a little music on that's not stressful. It doesn't raise my heart rate. It doesn't make me think about the story that they're telling. Just instruments. And I just breathe, man, and notice and be happy to be giving myself this time. So those are my big three.
Hey, they sound very therapeutic, and I couldn't agree anymore. Now, listen, where can people find you if they want to learn more information? I know that this morning I was checking you out, man. You were talking about making sure you have a vision, which is a very important element when it comes to mental health. But for people to keep following your content, where can people find you?
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about my content, what I do, you can find me pretty much on most of the social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, at Julius Thomas. It's a variation of Julius Thomas on all those platforms, but I'm pretty hard to miss. You'll recognize the 6'5" guy. So you can find me on those platforms. I have my website, optimalperformancesystem.com, which is for anybody that would want to work with me or have me come in and speak, things like that. And in the future, I'm really working on going to start building out my optimal performance channels in and of their own, so I can start to really develop that brand and start to bring in other people that are committed and work in this performance space because, I just have the humility to recognize that the changes that I want to see at a population-based level, I will never be able to do by myself. It's going to take an army of well-trained and well-educated individuals to really help champion and create greater prevention in our country. And that's why I'm always so supportive of everything you do. That's why I'm appreciative that I got a chance to meet you, that I get a chance to work with you. And I couldn't be more happy to have somebody like you that I can consult with and stay motivated with. So your brothership is greatly appreciated.
Thanks, bro. Hey, iron sharpens iron, man.
Absolutely, man. And I don't know, man. I told you from the moment that we first met that your acumen and your commitment to this space, it's elite, right? I mean, a lot of people, what you're doing is amazing. It's informative. It's the voice that I mentioned earlier that we have to give a greater spotlight to, because all your information is evidence-based and you take the time to do the research to make sure what you're promoting and who you're putting onto your channels knows their stuff as well. So, man, sky's the limit for you. I'm happy to be here and watching you continue to grow, and anything I can do to help, man, anytime.
Thank you, bro. I always appreciate you, man. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. And as far as our audience, that's all we have time for today. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. We hope that you found the content of this episode insightful and thought-provoking for both your health and performance. As a quick reminder, guys, you can sign up for our newsletter or exclusive membership offering through our site. sportsrxnetwork.com. Follow and share our content on social media and subscribe to our podcast. We will include any relevant studies or references in the show notes. As a reminder, the information provided by the Sports Pharmacy Network is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Thank you again for listening to the Sports Pharmacy Network podcast, and we look forward to you joining us on the next episode.